there are an emerged amount of wonderful winemakers, very ambitious, who recognize that South Africa's old bushvine dry farm Chenin Blanc are really the industry's most valuable resource, and have been making truly fine, concentrated, rich, but usually dry, age-worthy wines. And that's exciting. Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Here we are looking at what's called the Wines of the World. That's the D3 section for the WSET Level 4, the diploma on South Africa. So this is a multi-series country, as all of them are, and we're going into series 2 here on the key grape variety, key white grape variety, but overall key grape variety of South Africa. That is Chenin Blanc. It is split into a 4-part series for Chenin Blanc. This part, which is available as free content, will discover the world of Chenin Blanc. So both its history, but also then how it was introduced into the Cape, and the importance of where we find it and what style you'll find it in the Cape. Parts 2 through to 4 will discover winemaking techniques, grape growing and winemaking techniques to make both the inexpensive version of Chenin Blanc and then the more premium, and we'll discuss key producers at the end. But parts 2 through to 4 are only available on my e-learning portal over at winewithjimmy.com. Okay, so let's start cracking on with the world of Chenin Blanc. The first thing we're going to do here is actually look at the range of grape varieties that we find across South Africa. Now, as you can see from the chart, white varieties are actually in the majority in South Africa. So you'll see really that dominated by Chenin Blanc, which nearly pushes 20%. Colombard coming in at about 12%, Sauvignon Blanc at about 10% and increasing, and then Chardonnay at sort of 6 or 7%. Now, the other varieties are red, looking at Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, which together combine to about 18%, and then Syrah and Pinotage together combine to about sort of 17%. But white varieties are the main order of the day. These 8 varieties, though, that you see on this map account for 80%, 80, of the country's total plantings. And in recent years, the area under vine has really reduced quite dramatically from around 101,000 hectares in 2008 to only 90,000 hectares in 2021. So that's a reduction of around 11%, those figures coming from Wines of South Africa. Reasoning behind that is that South Africa often occupies the really affordable end of the scale. Lots of wine sold in bulk, very inexpensively, and some producers have found that it's actually not economically viable, and other crops are more useful. Things like citrus and apple production are a little bit more useful. So there has been a bit of a decrease from those. Okay, let's talk about the world of Chenin Blanc, because we must, of course. So where, of course, is Chenin Blanc from originally? We know it's from France. We know it's actually from the Loire department. And it was first mentioned at the end of the 15th century in historical documents found at Chateau Chenonceau, which is in your picture in all of its glory. So this is a spectacular castle found on the River Cher. This is one of the tributaries that runs into the River Loire. This is found in the Touraine department, so quite close to the city of Tours. The castle was originally built here on the side of the river, and then an extra part, which is wonderful ballrooms, have been added onto it, which arch over the River Cher. It's quite beautiful indeed. Now, originally, Chenin Blanc was thought to be called names such as Plante d'Anjou, so the plant of Anjou, and also Pinot de la Loire, or sometimes called Gros Pinot as well. So there's some other names for it that you may find. What about its actual name, though, Chenin Blanc? How did that come into play? So between 1520 and 1535, a gentleman called Denis Brissonnet, the abbot of Courmery, and this is an actual monastery near Courmery just here. So this is in Touraine. And brother-in-law of Thomas Berrier planted various varieties from all over France in a place called Montchenin, which is in this picture just here. Sometimes it's Montchenin, you might see a hyphen between the T and the C just here, so Montchenin. This is a monastery near Courmery, which is just south of Tours. It is thought that the name is derived, the etymology, from this. So Montchenin, of course, Chenin Blanc, the white grape of this monastery. Chenin Blanc was referred to in the Western Cape as Steen. So that's S-T-E-E-N, as you'll see at the bottom there. And it actually originally was thought to be indigenous to South Africa up to 1963, when Professor C.J. Orfler confirmed Steen's match to Chenin Blanc. The name Steen is thought to have been used by Governor Simon van der Stel, or Simon van der Stel, as he believed the grape to have originated in Germany based on the quality, so i.e. Stein, where it's coming from. More in terms of the importance history here for the Western Cape. So despite the fact over time it was believed to be indigenous, there actually are documents and there are stories passed down that it was introduced into the Western Cape. It was thought that Chenin Blanc made the journey to the Cape on the request of a very important Cape commander, the first, and that is Jan van Riebeek, or maybe with the first sort of early French Huguenots that were escaping persecution in Europe, who arrived in South Africa. Steendruven was quite possibly one of the first grapes pressed in 1659, and that was the year that wine was first made in South Africa, having been introduced in 1655 by Jan van Riebeek and the Dutch East India Company. Famous phrase that he has said, praise be to God, for wine has been produced in the Cape for the first time from Cape grapes. So nice history. That means it has quite an extensive amount of history in the Cape. We are looking at a few hundred years under its belt, and that's really significant that it has been cultivated for such long periods of time within the Western Cape. Now, what about the style of Chenin Blanc? So first of all, the general style of Chenin Blanc is that it is an early budding variety, meaning that it is a problematic variety in terms of spring frosts. Now, this is much more problematic in France, but there are parts of South Africa, such as the Brede Kloof, which certainly has problems with spring frosts. But generally, it is an issue which is much abated in South Africa. It also ripens late, making it vulnerable to the onset of any late autumnal weather. And Chenin Blanc tends to ripen unevenly, so it's best dealt with several passes through the vineyard. However, there is more consistency with Chenin Blanc in South Africa in comparison to the Loire Valley in terms of its uneven ripening. But of course, thinking about that logically, machine harvesting will harvest everything in one swoop. So you will have to think about hand harvesting, which is not an issue in South Africa due to the availability, the affordable availability of labour across the Western Cape. It is a vigorous variety, and if allowed unchecked, it can actually produce quite exceptionally high yields, certainly in those areas that tend to be irrigated and on fertile soils with high nutrients. Chenin Blanc accounts for just under 17,000 hectares in South Africa, with large volume regions such as Paarl, the Brede Kloof and Worcester, all combining to produce around 45% of South Africa's output of Chenin Blanc. So nearly half in just those 3 parts of South Africa. Issues with the variety: it is prone to mildew, which means this is problematic in areas like the Western Swartland. Areas such as Stellenbosch can experience issues like this as well, and also botrytis bunch rot. But of course, there are positives to be found with botrytis for sweet wine production. And it's also problematic with things like trunk-borne diseases such as Esker, for example. Now, where growers are seeking a wine with high proportions of botrytis-affected grapes, multiple passes through the vineyard and picking by hand will be necessary, adding to cost. But of course, this is probably not as important as you'd find in places like Bonnet-Zo and Chaume in places like the Loire Valley, for example. And one of the big benefits is Chenin Blanc has an excellent ability to maintain high acidities, which is particularly useful in the warm Cape climate. And its relatively neutrality when grown in high yields, as much of it is, means that it has been used for just about everything in the Western Cape, from stretching sort of blended style wines to more fashionable varieties to base wines for distillation. So you'll find it used for everything. It's also found, of course, in sparkling production due to its useful amount of natural high acidities. What do we taste like then? So we do know, I just mentioned that, yes, it's quite useful because it has a high production acidity, therefore it gives a good balance blended with others. But there are really, and I keep using the word emerging, but I think they've emerged. There are an emerged amount of wonderful winemakers, very ambitious, who recognize that South Africa's old bushvine dry farm Chenin Blanc are really the industry's most valuable resource and have been making truly fine, concentrated, rich, but usually dry, age-worthy wines. And that's exciting. You'll find exquisite wines made by the likes of Chris and Suzanne Alhit at Cartology, for example, which are just wonderful, but many, many more on top of that as well. Now, with the cooler parts, you'll find that the high acidity examples produce the apple, pear, and slightly quince element of Chenin Blanc. And as you increase the warmth and the ripeness of Chenin, you move into the likes of honeysuckle, perhaps a little bit of ginger, melon, and pineapple, and often a distinct but quite wonderful honey note to the wine. Maybe the wine has been oaked, so you'll often find lees-based characters and things like vanilla. Often butterscotch can be found as well. And even things like almond and sort of toasty notes, certainly with a little bit of age. Now, high volume wines are acceptable to good in price and inexpensive to mid-priced, while higher quality wines are very good to outstanding and mid to premium price, with a small number of super premium wine examples. I mentioned Chris Alhit's Cartology. Some very famous names are things like Ken Forrester, for example, bigger wine farms like Spear, Kleiner Zausi, and much smaller producers like Memento, for example, and many others. Some very exciting names. What else do we mention? The exciting names that we just mentioned very briefly. I'm going to go through a more comprehensive format in video 4 to really excite you about what you should be looking for in terms of trying some of these exquisite Chenin Blancs. That brings my video here on Chenin Blanc as a grape variety, but also pertinent to South Africa, to a close. I hope you have enjoyed the information you have learnt in this video. Please do join me for part 2, where we look at the grape growing and winemaking practices behind high volume and expensive Chenin Blanc. And that part, along with part 3 and 4, are only available to my e-learning subscribers. That's over at www.winewithjimmy.com. You can also get in touch with us if you need to by emailing info@winewithjimmy.com, or please use the social media you see at the bottom of every slide. And of course, if you do find yourself in the United Kingdom, then come and see me, perhaps at my winery or at one of my wine schools or my wine bar for a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Bye-bye.